Welcome back to another episode of the Freedom Shots podcast. Today, I am so thrilled to be joined by Paris Apodaca, a independent journalist and first-generation college student at the University of Washington. Her work has appeared in a number of publications, including the American Post Liberal and the College Fix, which we will talk about your recent article here in a few moments, Paris. But first, let's get to know each other a little bit. For those that are new here, I'm your host, Victoria Snitsar Churchill, a conservative, a political journalist and commentator, and this is my independent project, the Freedom Shots podcast. And for those that don't know me in real life or my story, and what I refer to as my villain origin story, and why I can't tolerate most liberals and why wokeness makes me want to yak is because of this. I grew up in the Seattle area from age 3 to 16. I grew up in Sammamish, which is in the Seattle suburbs. I went to Skyline High School, and my mom's going to say that I'm sharing too much about myself on the internet, but guess what? This is all public information anyways. If you played a high school sport or anything, people can look you up and find things out about you just for kind of continuity and I guess for the plot, as the Gen Zs say, which I am a Gen Z. I'm 27, but I guess I'm the oldest. I'm right on the cusp of the Gen Z and the millennials. But as we say, the internet is forever, so information like that already exists. And my high school athletic records and my journalism work will discover that for you, so you don't have to do that research yourself. I'm just being upfront and telling that with you. And anyways, so I grew up surrounded by liberals, but I'll say I didn't hate most of them because I was the odd one out. I thought I was pretty weird. I was in a lot of different ways, but I wasn't even that much of an outspoken conservative. This was during the Obama years, so I knew that I didn't like Obama. But I think for me, those feelings came more from a place of not necessarily conservatism or more from an overall dislike or distrust of government. Also, as I talk about in both my writing and my commentary work, my family are immigrants. I'm a naturalized citizen, and both my parents grew up in the former Soviet Union. I knew that I disliked communism and that capitalism was good, but again, just the government in general, I felt was way too big and way too powerful and didn't necessarily have the best interests of citizens at heart. And what I saw during those Obama years was just a failure of government being way too big and way too oppressive. And so I think, especially in those times, I considered myself more libertarian than actually explicitly conservative. So then I always say that going to college radicalized me. Being a more pacifist libertarian self at the time, I did used to believe that both sides had good points, but then I realized while I was in college that if you give the left an inch, they will take a mile or even run a full marathon on you. So, yes, I always say that during college I became much more radically conservative because I saw firsthand from both my peers and the institutions that liberalism, wokeness, and DEI is truly a disease, as some say, particularly a disease of the mind. So when I was in college, I decided to fight back and fight hard, not just being a campus activist, but being on the ground, eyes and ears that could show and tell the world about some of the maddening things that I experienced on campus. Hence, I myself actually wrote for both Campus Reform and the College Fix, which is where your article today is from, Paris, when I was a student at the University of Kansas. And so now that we all know a little bit of my background, I wanted to share with you all Paris and invite her on the show to share her story because I see so many parallels between what she is doing now and what I was doing with my life 7, 8, and even 10 years ago. So, Paris, welcome so much to the Freedom Shots podcast. Please share a little bit about you with our audience and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria. I'm so happy to be here on the Free Shots podcast. Our stories are very similar. It's so interesting to see that. I also grew up in the suburbs about an hour away from Seattle in a little town called Lake Stevens, Washington. It's in Snohomish County. Victoria probably knows that's more of a little bit more conservative, but when we mean conservative in Washington state, it's pretty fair rather than being actually conservative. It's pretty even out. Growing up, I also had a similar interpretation of the conservative movement, also very libertarian based, not very social conservative, but very capitalist oriented. Neither one of my parents finished higher education, and so it was important for me to have an education. And my first step was going to community college, where I found the student newspaper, rose up the ranks, and became editor-in-chief there. Also did some academic undergrad research for inflammatory language. regards to how politicians use and manipulate people's identities. It's really interesting how politicians can do that. And in my little local community college, there was one conservative professor, and I confessed my conservative sin to him. And he opened my world and brought me to the ISI network, which is the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. And from there, they opened my academic conservative and had conferences and so much opportunities. They hooked me up with my first job in Gig Harbor as an editorial assistant. But after 6 months into my first job, I was miserable. I realized I had to get back to school because that's where my heart was. So I started my education journey at the University of Washington in the fall. And it was an absolutely letdown because the University of Washington's campus is extremely woke. Over the summer, I'd been reading very Aristotle and Plato, very these intense political theorists. And then I took my first class into Intro to Political Theory, and we were talking about Hannah Arendt, a woke feminist that's not a foundational thinker. And it's like, how do we understand her banality of evil without reviewing what the good is and what evil is in those fundamental concepts? I tuned out and almost I passed all my classes just barely. And then I wanted to supplement my education through activism and freelance journalism. And so I started freelancing with the College Fix and the American Post Liberal, and also my Substack where I examine political language. But also on the side, I'm doing activism work because I know, Victoria, you're also into activism. So I'm on the Young Republicans of Washington State Government Affairs Committee. I'm also a senior officer for the Huskies for Liberty, Washington State's libertarian group. And I'm working on becoming an officer at the Washington University's Turning Point campus, Turning Point, sorry, officers. And that sums up how I got here, really.
And the thing that always shocks me and has really shocked me now I haven't lived in Seattle for over a decade now, but the question that I ask is like, how did Seattle become this maddening
Mhm.
area of liberalism? Seattle historically has been a place of innovation and entrepreneurship. Some of our biggest and best, most successful companies of America have come from the Pacific Northwest. Microsoft, Amazon, Costco, and yes, people don't realize, but Kirkland Signature, they're all rocking their Kirkland Signature swag. That's from the Northwest. That's about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And also the Costco headquarters in Issaquah, Washington is literally down the street from where I grew up. We even have other big brands like Starbucks and even Nordstrom, because for those that don't know, Nordstrom started as an outfitter during the turn of the 20th century in the Alaska Gold Rush. Outside of just tech, we have so many other iconic brands. So we have such a rich and vibrant history of Seattle and even the greater Pacific Northwest being a place of freedom and adventurism and entrepreneurship that the world has seen from Seattle over the past decade or so, which again, I personally have not experienced because I haven't lived here or there during that time. And I live just outside of the other Washington in Washington, D.C. But I've definitely kept tabs watching from afar. And we're talking about during COVID, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or elected officials who are straight up Democratic socialists, or as I would call them, straight up socialists. I don't really know where the Democratic comes into their rhetoric or their ideology, or really borderline like anarchists. And so you've been a lot closer to this than I have. What's your take on all of this, Paris?
Yeah, it really sums down to bad policies allow people to get away with horrible things. Walking to university every day, I just expect to see people doing drugs on the street. The streets smell like urine and the graffiti is just everywhere. The clean Emerald City that we once knew does not exist anymore. In October, I actually went to DC and I was surprised how safe it felt compared to Seattle. Decriminalization just simply doesn't work. Leftists worry so much about labels defining people, but they don't care about the safety of their citizens in their cities. Labeling someone as a criminal doesn't labels the behavior, not the person. They choose to act in violent criminal ways. The institutions really don't force people to act certain ways. They just institute norms that don't really benefit the people at the current time. And if we don't have faith in our state's policies and governance, it's just simply anarchy, which we've seen with these events. And that's my take on the events, Victoria.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in your intro, your work has appeared in a number of outlets, including the American Post Liberal, the College Fix, and recently you had an article in the College Fix titled "Trans Activists Smash Windows, Shut Down Pro-Women TPUSA Event at the University of Washington." Tell us a little bit about that event, how you were involved, and your story that came out of it. Give us a firsthand account of what that was all about.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. I appreciate it. Yeah, the Turning Point USA event on the University of Washington's campus was hosted for Olivia Kolchik, and she was giving her talk on protecting women from men and the threat of the trans agenda. And how I got involved was the conservative movement is very tight-knit on the UW campus, and some of my friends said they needed help with the event. So I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll help set up the event and help your community." And then so I met Olivia, she's great, and she really spoke about how the movement is really trying to prioritize women's privacy and just our opportunities in general. And just so I was really excited to see her views at campus as a female conservative. And then, so the event, before it started, there were protesters outside from the LGBTQ community. We're not quite sure which group they were. They started line dancing, which was very entertaining. It was very peaceful. They had their flyers for the Q Center and very trans-oriented resources there for them. And then people held signs up, and it was a riot. It was very entertaining. And then eventually the event started becoming open for people to come in. And then we had maybe 5 to 10 people in there before issues started happening. And Antifa with the Democratic Society of Students came from the main part of campus with a huge trans flag, maybe 100 people, into the area where we were having our event. And then it was very like destructive after that point with Antifa being there. The students were pretty much great. They were holding their signs, being very civically active and engaged, but Antifa was very dangerous. And then so once the event started, things went more south. We couldn't, the people pulled the fire alarms, so everyone had to get out of the building, which is where all the protesters were. So a lot of us were like very scared because we were with the protesters. But Olivia, she was with the police officer, so she was okay and safe. And then one of the journalists showed up, and then Antifa was just chasing him around. And it was like, oh my gosh, Antifa's harassing this guy. And then so we decided that the event was going to continue again, but with just people that we knew, no rioters or anything. But then after that, they got locked. The Turning Point USA of UW got locked in the room, and Antifa started breaking windows and throwing noisemakers in there, and then they had to cancel the event afterwards, after that. So yeah, that pretty much sums up everything that happened there.
And is this something that you've experienced before on campus? I know actually during my time in college when we were having some of these conservative speakers, back in my day it was Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk were ruffling feathers all up and down the country really on these speaking tours. And what we used to have to do as student activists is a lot of the times the universities would actually impose these security fees basically as an added fee because a lot of the times you'd have to pay a speaker fee to have a speaker come. And then the university would also tack this on, making it a lot harder to have conservative or freedom-loving speakers come to campus. Is this something that you guys experienced in the planning phase, or was there any kind of security for the event that was already there, or did this kind of all happen when Antifa showed up?
Yeah, I'm not aware of the security precautions because I'm very new to the group, but there was UW police there, like maybe 20 officers that were there. The chief was there, and they had the building pretty much locked down. And when people were evacuating, they had a specific area that we would go. It was very traumatic. So sorry if I'm telling this story off base. But yeah, they had a secure way for students to go, and then we'd have to go back way around campus to leave. So it was pretty secure and safe until they started breaking windows.
Wow. And what did the college say after all this? What was their reaction? Did they side with you guys? Did they side with Antifa? Did they play a more neutral third middle ground?
Yeah, they were absolutely not a third party neutral ground. They definitely blamed Turning Point USA for the event because we were supposed to only allow people in that had signed up in advance for the event, but we were getting very spam emails in there, so we couldn't tell who was actually signed up for the event and who wasn't. So we just invited everyone in pretty much after that point because we couldn't tell who was invited and who wasn't. So the university blamed us for not taking better precautions in that way.
Wow. And have they come out and said anything about any future events that you guys might have on campus? Or is this kind of still up in the air of whether you'll be allowed to, or whether they're going to interject and make sure that anything else happens before you can have other speakers come to campus?
Not to my awareness. I think we are allowed to have events still, so we aren't censored in that way.
Did you feel like the university is censoring you or affecting any kind of perceptions that other students have of your group by saying that it was your fault for hosting the event?
Yes, absolutely. Very much so. Along with the student newspaper, I've got beef with there's an op-ed that was targeting us specifically, making us a bad guy in this case, and that we're basically practically evil for believing what we believe. And the university should really have acted as a third party so they didn't instigate people's biases in this way.
And has there anything that's been positive that's come out of this? Have any other students said that they're interested in joining the group or anything like that?
Not to my awareness. Most people that were coming that were iffy about the group were really scared about what happened in the event and felt very oppressed. Yeah.
And have you seen any of that resonate? You mentioned that the conservative student community is quite tight on campus. That's how it was for me when I went to campus to college at KU. I definitely remember being one of those few conservative students that banded together with others, but has there been any repercussions on any of the other like-minded groups?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think so.
And my motto or tagline here at Freedom Shots is seek truth and promote freedom. So how does your work as a student journalist and activist, how do you think that promotes freedom?
Yeah, as a student journalist, I seek truth by reporting on the cold facts, placing emphasis on people. People have always been my focus when reporting. Without people, there couldn't be events and there would be no need of reporting on the news. My article covered something that others missed. Who are the actors in this protest? They weren't all trans activists. There's some of them were Antifa, some of them were LGBTQ activists, trans activists, and there was also the Society of Democratic Students who were also protesting. And each had their individual message and were trying to say something different. Yes. And this version of reporting just what exactly is happening promotes freedom because it clearly addresses what's the group's political message, which was trans joy in one group. Antifa was harassment, violence, anarchy. And the Democratic Society of Students' message was the villain conservatives are oppressing trans rights. From this general reporting stance, as a political analyst, we can better describe and explain these events. And these events provide a good opportunity for op-eds to provide commentary on what happens and what are the consequences of free speech on campus. Thus, seeking truth naturally promotes freedom of speech because people always have opinions about the facts, which is often mistaken for moral relativism since the truth is the truth. So yeah, that's pretty much my stance on it is cold reporting It promotes freedom, and it's very like a cyclic thing.
And you mentioned op-eds. Have you all tried to place op-eds in the student newspaper, or do you know of any other like-minded students on campus that have tried to place op-eds in the student newspaper and if they've been able to do that or not?
I've tried to report for the Daily, but I was declined. But I know there are some conservatives, but I don't know if they have been approved or not.
And what's next for you? What else are you expecting other events like this to happen on campus? Can we see more of your reporting in the future on this?
Yeah, you can definitely expect more reporting for me for sure. Turning Point USA is hoping to have a panelist event as a reaction to this event. I don't know if I can say any more about that. And then also, I'm putting together a seminar with Professor Gill on campus. He's the libertarian political science professor, and he is going to talk about free speech and civic engagement. So I think this is going to change the narrative in a more positive direction for freedom of speech for sure.
And what would you say the overall mood is on campus towards the groups that actually broke the window? Are there actually going to be any repercussions for them for damaging part of the school?
Absolutely not. They're very supportive of that type of protesting and ideology.
Wow, that's absolutely insane. Are you trying to put any kind of pressure on the administration to actually make sure that these folks are held accountable? Or in my view, if they're not held accountable, they'll probably keep doing it, right?
Yeah, no, I didn't think of it like that. I might pursue that route.
Definitely best of luck there. Is there anything else you'd want to share? I'd actually love to learn a little bit more about your research that you had done on the kind of language that's used in political rhetoric. Do you have any more insights you could share on that?
Yeah, I've been exploring this for like maybe a year or so now, and in my op-ed regarding this piece, explored trans joy and how trans joy is used and politically motivated them to violence. That's as much as I can talk about that off the cuff right now. But yeah, very much on how language shapes our political identities in a way. Like when you're looking at maybe like policy, you can instantly tell what a politician's views on something are depending on which keywords they use and how they use them and what they're trying to prescribe for people.
Wow. I'd love to learn more about your research. Maybe we can have you back on in a future episode to talk more about that. Thank you again so much for joining me. Where can people follow you and follow your work?
Yeah, people can keep up with my work on Substack, which is just my name, Paris Apodaca. And my social media handle is prolific_Paris.
Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you
much for
again.
having me on
Yeah,
here.
thank you so much. And I'm sure we will have you back on soon. Like I said, very interested in what's going on back in my former home state. So definitely best of luck out there. I know it's full of a bunch of crazies, but you're out there fighting the good fight.
Sweet. Thank you, Victoria.